Welcome back to my corner of the garage, where today we're going to be building these 4 workbench accessories. Now, if you missed my last build, go ahead and jump back and watch that if you want to see how these are specifically going to tie into that workbench with my new table saw, router lift, and some of the storage and things. Otherwise, if you saw that and want to kind of see how I built these add-ons, that's what this whole build video is about. So hopefully it gives you some ideas, things you might want to incorporate in your own shop. So let's get into the build. For this first upgrade, we're going to have to jump back in time. As you'll see, this is halfway through my workbench build, and I kind of had this light bulb moment as I was laying in bed one night, kind of thinking about the process, and I ended up having this dead space right below where the table saw was going to be and above the drawer storage. And I got thinking, you know what, I could probably use that space with some slide out storage. And I had not really figured out how I was going to do my saw blade storage yet. And I don't know, this kind of came to me, and so what I'm doing here is just setting up a simple rail system. It's going to be, 3/4 inch plywood shelves that pull out, and so I'm just putting a couple playing cards in there to give it some wiggle room so it can slide nicely, and then building up a second layer so that I can get a second shelf in there. And I call these shelves, but really they're just sheet goods that can slide in and out, and they're going to have some pegs in them, as you'll see here in a bit. So here's just the simple process that I had to do beforehand. And now, jumping to later in the build, I could get those pieces cut down to their size, and you can see I kind of laid out my blades. For the bottom one, these are going to be my miter saw blades and then some circular saw blades. I both marked the center points where some dowels are going to go to hold in the blades into position, but also I'm marking out some finger holes so that you can actually grab the blades out easily. And at this point, I'm just making a simple handle, which I'm drilling out a couple of holes for the end points, and then I'll take it over to the jigsaw to cut those all the way through, as well as rounding over the edges. These big holes here are for those finger holes I was telling you about, and that's simply just to get the blades out easier. It gives you a place to put your fingers. There's 2 on each blade, makes it really easy to pull those out. And then here I'm preparing these dowels and then cutting them to real short sizes, and so I can install those specifically where the blades are going to rest. So now I'm preparing each of those holes just so I can put some CA glue on each of them, get them in place, and then I'll reinforce them with a screw each. Yeah. So there you go, a pretty simple solution, pretty simple build, way to store some saw blades in a wasted space. I could see this having application, where a drawer would go, or even mounted up underneath a fixed workbench in your garage. So you could use it in several applications, but pretty simple and all done. Let's move on to the next one. I'm cutting a piece of 12-inch by 12-inch acrylic now for this next accessory or upgrade, and it's going to be for my router lift. Actually, these next 3 are for a router table. So I know not everybody has a router lift built into their workbench, but most everybody has got a router and or a router table somehow set up. And so this is going to be basically integrating into my dust collection system that's built in. And you don't have to have built-in dust collection for this to be practical. It's pretty much just a good solution for collecting all that sawdust that gets thrown off the router when you're doing a round over or when you're doing a plunge cut. Just anytime you tend to use the router, it's throwing a lot of dust. Only if you have a fence set up and it happens to be, where it's actually collecting the dust. If it's right up against the fence, do you get to collect that? Whereas most of the time you're just throwing it all over the place. So this is kind of a solution, bit of a shroud, if you will, to kind of help keep that sawdust down. And I got this idea from one of the Facebook groups I'm in. Mine's a bit simpler, but I did really like the idea of using the acrylic on the top just to give you a little bit better visibility. But it's really just a simple 45-degree design, which just kind of acts like a hood right over the router and just allows you to position it where you need to, where it's throwing the most sawdust out. So getting all my angles cut, trying to get my layout lines done so I can temporarily just CA glue it to the backing paper at the moment of the acrylic, get all those pieces in place, and then I'll screw it down all together and secure it. A couple of notes here. When drilling through this acrylic, I went ahead and used a drill bit the same diameter as these screws. I wanted them grabbing into the wood but not cracking the acrylic. I'll back the screws off later on when I'm taking the paper backing off of that, but right now I just went ahead and screw those all the way in. And then here I'm putting on the feet. I made them plenty wide because they're going to have a knob with a T-track bolt on them so that they can actually secure to those T-tracks that the fence is secured to at the moment. So I pre-drilled some holes right at the stop of where this channel is going to start and stop. And so I set up my fence accordingly, cut through half the material, and then we'll raise the bit next. And so I made these pieces, wide enough that a knob can go on there, tighten down. I will say in the end, this whole shroud ended up being heavy enough that it doesn't really want to move anyway when it's sitting on the workbench, and not having it tethered down makes it easy to adjust and move as you might need. So this wasn't really a necessary step, but I found out in the end after some use with it. The dust hose was a tiny bit loose, so I went ahead and added some electrical tape to snug up that fit, as well as adding a couple of screws to keep that secured so it didn't want to pop out while in use. It's kind of a unique design and interesting look to it, so let's go take it over to the router lift and see how this thing performs. This next upgrade here can really be applied to just about any situation and for multiple tools. Now, it's specifically to hold and organize my router accessories. It's a big magnet that you can pick up from Harbor Freight for just a few bucks. And like I said, you could use this in about any application. You could mount this thing directly to your wall, directly to a workbench, and stick your tools on it. I'm going ahead and putting a French cleat system on the back, just so that way I can move it around wherever I want to. And so it's as simple as, just making a bit of a backer and then attaching a French cleat to it. I'm drilling a hole out here for one of the aluminum accessories that doesn't stick to the magnet, but I'm simply, attaching the magnet to a piece of wood. And then here in a moment, I'm just going to glue on the French cleat. And it's super simple, but I'm probably going to make multiples of these for some of my various tools that are metal and magnetic, and put these around on my French cleats because it's just so easy. It is a no-brainer. Well, on to the last upgrade. Once again, this is for my router specifically, and I alluded to it in my Workbench build. I had this randomly narrow drawer because of dust collection and power running underneath one side of the Workbench top, and so I knew that was going to be my designated router bit storage. This design feature will make sense in just a second. I've clamped these two boards together so that I can put in a circle, which is going to be basically a half circle on each sheet. But I made a big mistake here by not clamping it to my drill press, and I chewed that up pretty good. I'll have to get pretty aggressive with the router later on to try and clean up that plywood. But doing the same thing kind of on the other side. I'm making two of these. One is for my collection of 1/4-inch shaft router bits, and the other one will be for 1/2 inch. I actually have none so far, but I just now got a router that has a 1/2 inch collet. So hopefully I'll be adding to my router bit collection with some big guys, and so drilling those out now. Put some close together for some of the more narrow router bits, and then putting some more spaced apart like chamfer bits and things. And here's the 1/4-inch one all done. So I can sand this down, clean it up, and then I'm going to take this over and put some chamfers on it, try and clean up my mistake as much as possible. Not exactly what I would have loved it to look like, but turned out pretty nice in the end. And then here I'm getting to use my little dust shroud to keep my workbench a little bit cleaner. All right, well, we can get this half loaded up for now, and that pretty much concludes our 4 upgrades for this specific workbench. Again, hopefully gave you some ideas in how you might upgrade some of your workbench storage and accessories. But thanks for watching.